I've always been a big guy, 6'2", 230 pounds, and I've spent enough time in MMA gyms to know how to handle myself if things get sideways. Usually, my size is a deterrent. People don't go looking for trouble with me, and I don't go looking for it with them. That's why, when my friend Misty asked if I wanted to split the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment, it felt like a win-win. She got a safe, reliable roommate who could fix a leaky faucet or scare off a creep, and I got a clean place with someone I actually liked. Then came Paul. Paul was Misty's boyfriend for about 6 months, and if you'd asked me back then, I would have told you he was a solid dude. He was the kind of guy who'd walk in, toss a bag of takeout on the table, and offer to roll a blunt while we talked about times, Skyrim times, or the latest UFC card. He was soft-spoken, maybe a little intense about his hobbies, but overall he seemed like the chill guy every girl hopes to find. He didn't have my build, he was wiry, twitchy, but he had this easygoing charisma that masked whatever was churning underneath. Looking back, the red flags weren't red. They were just a slightly different shade of normal that I chose to ignore. He'd get a little too quiet when Misty mentioned a male coworker. He'd check his phone with a frantic energy whenever she wasn't in the room. But I figured, hey, everyone has their insecurities. Then the chill Paul died, and the real Paul crawled out of the wreckage. The breakup wasn't a clean break. It was a detonation. Misty finally saw the controlling streaks for what they were, and ended it. Paul didn't take it like a man. He took it like a predator, losing his favorite toy. It started with the calls 50, 60 a day, then the accidental drive-bys. It got bad enough that Misty, who was one of the toughest women I know, went to the courthouse with shaking hands and got a restraining order. For a week, it was quiet. We thought the legal paper was a shield. We were wrong. The escalation happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I was deep into a session of Times SWAT 4 times on my PC. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, the volume cranked up to catch the sound of virtual footsteps. I was focused, tactical, completely tuned out of the real world. Then, a sound cut through the game audio. It wasn't a digital footstep. It was the unmistakable, bone-chilling times, crunch times, of safety glass shattering. I ripped my headphones off. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Then, Misty screamed a short, sharp burst of pure terror from the living room. I was out of my chair before the sound finished echoing. I didn't grab a weapon. At my size, I figured I was the weapon. I burst into the hallway just as Misty was backing away from the window that faced the side alley. The glass was gone, reduced to a jagged frame of shards. Through the hole, someone was throwing things. Clothes. Misty's clothes. Paul had gone to the dumpster where she tossed his leftover belongings. Or maybe he'd kept some of hers as trophies. He was hurling them through the broken pane with a manic, rhythmic violence. "Paul, stop!" Misty yelled, her voice cracking. I stepped into the light of the window, my shadow filling the space. "Paul, get the hell out of here!" I roared. I saw him for a split second in the amber glow of the street lamp. He didn't look like the guy who played video games with me. His hair was matted, his eyes were wide and rimmed with red, and his mouth was set in a terrifying, flat line. He didn't run. He just stared at me for 3 long seconds, a heavy silence hanging between us, before he turned and melted into the darkness of the alley. Misty was shaking. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, pulling her into the kitchen, away from the glass. "He's outside," she whispered, clutching her phone like a rosary. "He's been watching, hasn't he? The operator told us to stay put." We waited, and we waited. In movies, the cops arrive in minutes. In our city, on a Tuesday night, we were a low priority. It took 45 minutes for a patrol car to pull up. During those 45 minutes, the psychological warfare began. Misty's phone started blowing up. The Do Not Disturb feature was no match for the sheer volume of incoming texts. "Wrong move, bitch," the first one read. "I see you in there with him. You think he can protect you? I just want my vape back, Misty. Give me my stuff, or it gets worse." The vape thing was so mundane it was surreal. He had smashed a window and violated a restraining order over a $20 piece of plastic. Or more likely, he was using it as an excuse, a tether, to keep himself connected to her life. When the cops finally arrived, they were dismissive. They looked at the broken glass, took a statement, and noted the restraining order. One of them, a guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sighed as he tucked his notepad away. "Look, we'll cruise the area, but if he's gone, he said. "Get the window boarded up. Stay inside." "He's threatening her," I said, stepping forward, letting my height do the talking. "He's literally texting her right now, saying he's watching the house." The cop looked at me, then at Misty. "Block the number. Call us if he actually tries to enter the dwelling. Right now, it's a vandalism call and a violation of a court order. We'll put a warrant out, but it takes time." They left. The taillights of the cruiser faded, leaving us in a house that no longer felt like a home. I spent the rest of the night on the couch with a baseball bat and a heavy flashlight. Misty was holed up in her room, the door locked. Every time the house creaked, every time a car drove past, my adrenaline would spike. I kept thinking about Paul's face in the window, the lack of fear in his eyes. He wasn't scared of me. He wasn't scared of the law. He was focused on a singular, obsessive goal. The sun came up, but the dread didn't lift. I had to go to work the next day, a double shift at the warehouse. I didn't want to leave her, but Misty insisted. She had work too, and she promised she'd go straight to her sister's place afterward. We felt like we had a plan. We felt like we were regaining control. But Paul wasn't playing by our rules. He was playing a different game entirely. As I drove to work that afternoon, my skin was crawling. You know that feeling when someone is staring at the back of your neck? It followed me down the highway. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see his beat-up sedan tailing me. Around 6 p.m., while I was moving pallets in the humid heat of the warehouse, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Misty. My heart dropped into my stomach before I even read it. "He's here," it said. "I'm in the house. I think he's inside." I didn't even clock out. I just dropped the scanner, ran for the exit, and prayed to God I wasn't too late. I had no idea that while I was racing across town, Misty was living through a nightmare that would make the window smashing incident look like a playground spat. She was currently standing in her bedroom, staring at a closet door that was cracked open just an inch too wide, and a pair of unblinking eyes were staring back at her from the dark. The drive back from the warehouse was a blur of red lights and adrenaline-fueled rage. I remember my knuckles turning white against the steering wheel, the hum of the engine sounding like a dull roar in my ears. Every second I spent behind a slow-moving truck felt like an eternity. My mind was a frantic loop of worst-case scenarios. I'm a big guy, 6'2", 240 pounds, and I've spent enough time in gyms and back alley scraps to know how to handle myself. But as I pushed my car to its absolute limit, I didn't feel tough. I felt sick. I felt the weight of every moment I'd spent at work, while Misty was alone in that house with a predator who had finally found his way back inside. While I was white-knuckling it through traffic, Misty was living through the kind of quiet horror that most people only see in movies. She told me later that the house had felt heavy all afternoon. You know that feeling when you're sure someone is watching you? That prickle on the back of your neck that tells your lizard brain to run? She'd been sitting in the living room, trying to distract herself with a book, but the silence of the house was too loud. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the foundation felt intentional. She'd eventually gone up to her room to change, thinking she'd feel safer behind a locked bedroom door. That's when she saw it. The closet door in her room was old, one of those heavy wooden sliders that never quite stayed on the track. She knew for a fact she'd closed it that morning, but as she stood there, the sunlight fading into a bruised purple outside her window, she realized the door was cracked open about 2 inches, and in that 2-inch gap of shadow, there was a glimmer. It wasn't a reflection of glass or metal. It was the wet, dull shine of a human eye. Misty is a hell of a lot stronger than I think even she realized. Most people would have screamed. Most would have bolted. But she said a strange, icy calm washed over her. She knew if she ran, he'd be on her in a second. She stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, and she reached out. With a trembling hand, she slid the closet door open. There was Paul. He wasn't lunging. He wasn't yelling. He was just crouched there, folded into the corner of the closet amongst her shoes and hanging dresses like some kind of oversized, malignant insect. He was wearing the same hoodie he'd had on the night he smashed the window, his face pale and gaunt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, but his eyes were wide, fixed on her with a terrifying blank intensity. There was no warmth left in him, no trace of the chill dude who used to roll blunts on our coffee table. He was a stranger. For a long beat, neither of them moved. The air in the room felt thick, like it had been replaced with static. Then, Paul spoke. His voice was a dry, raspy whisper, devoid of any inflection. "I just want my vape back, Misty," he said. It was so mundane, so pathetically small, that it made the situation 1,000 times more terrifying. He had broken a restraining order, stalked her, smashed a window, and broken into our home, all while hiding in a dark closet for God knows how long, just to utter a sentence about a plastic nicotine stick. It wasn't about the vape. It was about the control. It was about showing her that no matter where she went, no matter how many locks she turned, he could still reach out and touch her. Misty didn't argue. She didn't cry. She kept her eyes locked on his and slowly backed away toward the bed where her phone was lying. "Okay, Paul," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "I'll help you find it. Just stay right there." She picked up her phone. She didn't call 911 right then. She was afraid the operator's voice would trigger him into a frenzy. Instead, she sent me that text. The text that sent me flying across the city. Then, she stayed in that room with him. She kept him talking, kept him focused on the triviality of the lost vape, playing into his delusion just enough to keep the beast at bay. I pulled into the driveway so hard the gravel sprayed against the garage door. I didn't even turn off the engine. I was out of the car and on my phone with 911 before my feet hit the porch. "My roommate's ex is in the house," I told the dispatcher, my voice a low, vibrating growl. "He's got a restraining order. He's in her room. Send everyone. Now." I didn't wait for them. I kicked the front door open. I didn't even check if it was locked. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my vision tunneling. I didn't have a weapon, but I had 240 pounds of protective rage. And in that moment, I was ready to kill him with my bare hands. I burst into Misty's room just as she was backing toward the door. Paul was finally out of the closet, standing in the center of the room. He looked small. He looked pathetic. When he saw me, his expression didn't change. He didn't look scared. He just looked annoyed, like I was an interruption he hadn't planned for. "Get out," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. "I'm just getting my stuff, man," Paul said, his voice still that flat, eerie monotone. He started to take a step toward Misty, and I moved. I stepped between them, towering over him, my chest inches from his. I could smell the stale sweat and the cold air on him. "Touch her, and you don't leave this house on your own power," I told him. We stood like that for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 3 minutes. The tension was a physical weight in the room. Misty was behind me, her hand on my shoulder, and I could feel her shaking now that the immediate fight or flight had peaked. Then came the sirens. They didn't start far off. They seemed to explode right outside the house. Blue and red lights began to strobe against the bedroom walls, cutting through the twilight. Boots pounded on the porch, then the stairs. 4 officers burst into the room, guns drawn but held at the low ready. They didn't have to ask who the intruder was. Paul didn't even resist. He just held his hands out, his face remaining perfectly blank as the metal cuffs ratcheted shut around his wrists. One of the cops, a veteran who looked like he'd seen everything the city had to throw at him, looked at Paul, then looked at the closet, then back at us. He shook his head, a look of genuine disgust on his face. "He was in the closet?" the cop asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice finally cracking as the adrenaline began to ebb. "He was waiting for her." The cop looked at Paul and muttered, "That's some movie villain shit, kid. You're going away for a long time." As they led Paul out, he didn't look back. He didn't yell, "I love you," or "I'm sorry," or "I hate you." He just drifted out of the room like a ghost, leaving behind a trail of shattered safety and a house that would never feel quite like home again. Once the house was cleared and the statements were taken, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was empty. My manager at the warehouse had called me 3 times. When I finally called back and explained, he just told me to take the week off. Paid. I'll always be grateful for that. Misty and I sat on the porch for a long time that night, watching the street lights flicker. She was a goddamn rock. She'd saved her own life by staying calm when most people would have folded, but I could see the toll it took. Every time a car drove by, she flinched. Every time the wind caught a branch against the siding, she looked toward the door. We ended up moving out a month later. We couldn't stay there. You can't scrub the feeling of a stalker out of the floorboards. I still think about Paul sometimes. Not the guy who rolled blunts and talked about Zelda, but the thing that was in that closet. It's a reminder that you never really know anyone. The person you think is chill can turn into a nightmare overnight, fueled by a toxic cocktail of obsession and entitlement. Misty is doing better now. She's in a new place, with better locks and a dog that barks at everything that moves. But we both still check the closets before we go to bed. It's a habit you don't just break. To anyone out there dealing with a Paul, don't wait. Don't think it'll get better. Don't think they're just going through a phase. If your gut tells you something is wrong, listen to it, because by the time they're in the closet, the time for talking is long gone.